My name is Emily, and I'm 24 years old. I live in a small town in Maine where everyone knows everyone else's business. For most of my life, it was a pretty idyllic existence. I had a loving mom and dad, a comfortable home, and dreams of becoming a veterinarian. Animals have always been my passion, and I spent countless hours volunteering at the local animal shelter, tending to injured wildlife, and even nursing stray kittens back to health in my bedroom. My dad, Robert, owned a successful construction company. He was a hard-working, honest man who built his business from the ground up. Mom, Sarah, was a stay-at-home mom who dedicated her life to raising me and creating a warm and loving home. Life wasn't perfect, but it was pretty close. Then, when I was 16, everything changed. My mom passed away unexpectedly from an aneurysm. It was sudden, devastating, and it ripped a hole in our lives that never truly healed. Dad was never quite the same, and neither was I. We leaned on each other, trying to navigate the immense grief that consumed us. A few years passed, and slowly, Dad started to come back to life. He started socializing again, and then he met Carol. Carol was a whirlwind of energy, a complete opposite of my quiet, reserved mom. She was loud, boisterous, and always the center of attention. She had a daughter, Jessica, who was my age. From the moment I met them, I knew they were trouble. Carol was clearly after Dad's money, and Jessica was just plain mean. They moved into our house a few months later, and things went downhill fast. Carol redecorated everything, throwing out Mom's things and replacing them with gaudy, expensive items. Jessica took over my room, forcing me to move into the smaller guest room. They constantly criticized me, my clothes, my friends, my dreams. Dad, blinded by his infatuation with Carol, didn't see what was happening. He just wanted to be happy again, and Carol knew how to play him. A year later, Dad and Carol got married. I tried to be happy for him, but it was hard. It felt like my mom was being erased, replaced by this woman who cared more about money than family. After the wedding, things got even worse. Carol started pressuring Dad to change his will. He had always planned to leave the construction company and the majority of his assets to me, his only child. But Carol convinced him that it wasn't fair to Jessica, that she deserved an equal share. Dad, wanting to keep the peace, eventually caved. He changed his will, splitting everything equally between me and Jessica. I was hurt and angry, but I didn't say anything. I didn't want to cause more drama. I figured that even half of what Dad had was still a good start. I just focused on finishing high school and getting into vet school. I got accepted to a great program a few states away, and I couldn't wait to leave Maine and start a new life. But my plans were about to be derailed in the most devastating way possible. A week before I was supposed to leave for college, Dad had a heart attack. He was only 52 years old. It was sudden and unexpected, just like Mom's death. I was completely shattered. The funeral was a blur of grief and disbelief. Carol and Jessica put on a show of mourning, but I could see through their crocodile tears. They were already planning their next move. A few days after the funeral, the will was read. As expected, everything was split equally between me and Jessica. However, there was a small clause that I didn't understand. It stated that if either me or Jessica passed away before the age of 25, the other would inherit the entire estate. I didn't think much of it at the time. It seemed like a standard legal formality, but Carol's eyes gleamed when she heard it. I should have known then that something was up. After the reading of the will, Carol and Jessica wasted no time in making their presence felt. They started making decisions about the construction company without consulting me, selling off assets and making questionable deals. I tried to voice my concerns, but they brushed me aside. They treated me like I was an inconvenience, a nuisance standing in the way of their plans. I felt helpless and alone, grieving for my dad and watching his legacy being destroyed. I knew I had to do something, but I didn't know what. Then one night I overheard a conversation that changed everything. I was coming downstairs for a glass of water when I heard Carol and Jessica talking in the living room. They thought I was asleep. "Everything's going according to plan," Carol said, her voice dripping with satisfaction. "Once Emily's out of the picture, we'll have it all." "How are you going to do it?" Jessica asked. "It has to look like an accident," Carol chuckled. "Don't worry, darling, I have a plan, a foolproof plan." I froze, my blood running cold. They were planning to kill me. My own stepmother and stepsister were plotting my murder, all for the sake of money. I quietly crept back upstairs, my mind racing. I couldn't believe what I had just heard. I was terrified, but I also knew that I couldn't let them get away with it. I had to protect myself, and I had to find a way to expose them for the monsters they were. I spent the next few days in a state of paranoia, constantly looking over my shoulder. I knew they could strike at any time. I started sleeping with a knife under my pillow, and I avoided being alone with them. I also started secretly recording their conversations, hoping to gather enough evidence to take to the police. But I knew that wouldn't be enough. I needed a plan, a way to turn the tables on them and make them pay for what they had done. That's when I decided to seek out the help of someone who knew the ins and outs of the legal system. My dad's old friend and lawyer, Mr. Thompson. Little did they know, their carefully laid plans were about to unravel, and I was about to unleash a storm of revenge they never saw coming. Mr. Thompson was a kind, elderly man who had known my dad for many years. He was shocked and saddened to hear about my suspicions regarding Carol and Jessica. "Emily, this is a serious accusation," he said, his brow furrowed with concern. "Do you have any proof?" I played him the recordings I had made, the ones where Carol and Jessica discussed their plans to harm me. His face paled as he listened. This is damning evidence," he stammered. "We need to take this to the police immediately." I shook my head. "No," I said. "The police won't be able to do anything until something actually happens to me. Carol and Jessica are too smart. They'll make sure it looks like an accident. I need to find a way to expose them, to prove that they're capable of murder before they have a chance to hurt me." Mr. Thompson sighed. "I understand your concerns, Emily, but what do you propose we do? We can't just sit back and wait for them to make a move." I had a plan, a risky one, but I believed it was the only way to truly get justice for my dad and protect myself. "I want to lure them into a trap," I said. "I want to make them think that their plan is working, that I'm vulnerable and unsuspecting. And then, when they least expect it, I'll expose them for who they really are." Mr. Thompson looked at me skeptically. "That's a dangerous game, Emily. Are you sure you're up for it?" "I have to be," I said, my voice filled with determination. "I won't let them get away with this." Over the next few weeks, Mr. Thompson and I worked tirelessly to put my plan into motion. We started by gathering as much information as possible about Carol and Jessica's finances, their business dealings, and their personal lives. We discovered that they were deeply in debt, that they had been gambling heavily, and that they were desperate for money. This gave me a better understanding of their motives and their weaknesses. I then started acting differently around Carol and Jessica. I pretended to be naive and gullible, acting as if I trusted them completely. I even started confiding in them, telling them about my fears and insecurities. They ate it up, believing that I was finally falling into their trap. Carol started suggesting that I take a break from the stress of dealing with my dad's estate. She suggested a vacation, a relaxing getaway to a remote cabin in the woods. "Just you and me, dear," she said, her voice dripping with fake concern. "We can bond, relax, and forget all about our troubles." I pretended to be thrilled with the idea. "Oh, Carol, that sounds wonderful," I gushed. "I would love to get away for a few days." Little did she know, I was setting the stage for my own trap. Mr. Thompson helped me arrange for the cabin to be equipped with hidden cameras and microphones. We also hired a private investigator to keep an eye on Carol and Jessica, to make sure they didn't try anything before we were ready. The day of the trip finally arrived. I packed my bags, making sure to include a few essential items, like a small recording device and a self-defense weapon. As we drove to the cabin, Carol chattered away about how excited she was for our girls' trip. Jessica, who had decided to come along at the last minute, sat in the back seat, smirking to herself. I played along, pretending to be oblivious to their true intentions. When we arrived at the cabin, I was surprised by how isolated it was. It was miles away from the nearest town, surrounded by dense forest. It was the perfect place to commit a crime and get away with it, or so they thought. I spent the first day acting like I was having a wonderful time. I went for walks in the woods with Carol and Jessica, played board games with them, and even helped them cook dinner. I made sure to compliment them constantly, telling them how much I appreciated their company. They seemed to be genuinely enjoying themselves, which made me even more uneasy. I knew that they were just waiting for the right moment to strike. That night after dinner, Carol suggested that we have a bonfire. "It'll be so much fun," she said. "We can roast marshmallows, tell stories, and just relax under the stars." I agreed, knowing that this was likely their opportunity. We gathered around the bonfire, roasting marshmallows and sharing stories. Carol and Jessica were both drinking heavily, which made them even more reckless. As the night wore on, Carol started getting more and more aggressive. She started making snide remarks about my dad, saying that he was a fool for trusting me. "He should have known that you were just after his money," she slurred. "You're just like your mother, a gold digger." I pretended to be hurt by her words, but inside I was seething with anger. I knew that she was trying to provoke me, to get me to react so that she would have an excuse to hurt me, but I refused to give her the satisfaction. I just smiled sweetly and said, "You know, Carol, I've been thinking a lot about my dad lately, and I've realized that he wouldn't want us to fight. He would want us to be a family." Carol scoffed. "Family? You and I will never be family. You're just a burden, a nuisance that's standing in the way of what's rightfully ours." Jessica chimed in, "Yeah, Emily, why don't you just do us all a favor and disappear?" That was my cue. I took a deep breath and said, "You know, Carol, Jessica, I've been meaning to talk to you both about something." I paused, letting the suspense build. "I know what you've been planning." Their faces paled. Carol's eyes narrowed and Jessica's jaw dropped. "What are you talking about?" Carol asked, her voice trembling slightly. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the recording device. "I know that you've been planning to kill me," I said, holding up the device. "I have proof." I pressed play, and the recording of Carol and Jessica's conversation filled the air. Their voices discussing their plans to harm me echoed through the night. The bonfire crackled and popped, providing a haunting soundtrack to their betrayal. Carol and Jessica stared at me in disbelief, their faces a mixture of shock, anger, and fear. How did you get that?" Carol stammered. "It doesn't matter," I said. "Matters is that I know the truth, and now the police will know the truth too." I reached for my phone, but Jessica lunged at me, trying to grab it. I sidestepped her and pushed her away. "Don't even think about it," I said. "It's over." Carol, realizing that her plan had been exposed, snapped. She grabbed a nearby fire poker and charged at me, her eyes filled with rage. "I'll kill you," she screamed. "I'll kill you right now." I was prepared for this. I quickly grabbed the self-defense weapon from my pocket. It was a small but powerful taser. As Carol swung the fire poker at me, I dodged the blow and fired the taser. The electricity coursed through Carol's body, causing her to collapse to the ground, convulsing uncontrollably. Jessica screamed and ran towards her mother, but I blocked her path. "Stay back," I said, my voice cold and hard, "or you'll be next." Jessica froze, her eyes wide with terror. I pulled out my phone and called the police. "I need to report a crime," I said. "I'm at a cabin in the woods, and my stepmother just tried to kill me." I gave them the address and waited for them to arrive. The police arrived a few hours later, sirens blaring and lights flashing. They took Carol and Jessica into custody, and they were later charged with attempted murder and conspiracy to commit murder. The evidence I had gathered, along with the testimony of Mr. Thompson and the private investigator, was more than enough to convict them. They were both sentenced to life in prison, where they would have plenty of time to reflect on their actions. As for me, I was finally able to grieve for my dad in peace. I sold the construction company and used the money to start a foundation in his name, dedicated to helping underprivileged kids pursue their dreams. I also went back to vet school and finally achieved my lifelong goal of becoming a veterinarian. I dedicated my life to helping animals, just like I had always wanted to. I moved to a small town in Montana, where I opened my own clinic. I lived a quiet, peaceful life, surrounded by the animals I loved. Years later, I received a letter from Carol. She was writing from prison, begging for forgiveness. She claimed that she was a changed woman, that she regretted everything she had done. I read the letter, but I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, no pity, just emptiness. I knew that she was just trying to manipulate me, to get me to feel sorry for her. But I refused to fall for her tricks. I tore up the letter and threw it away. Carol and Jessica had taken so much from me, but they wouldn't take anything else. I had my revenge, and I had moved on with my life. I had found peace, happiness, and fulfillment, and that was all that mattered. I closed the chapter on that dark period of my life, ready to embrace the future with open arms, forever grateful for the strength and resilience I discovered within myself. But there was one final twist to the story, a revelation that would forever change my perception of my family and the events that had transpired. A few months after Carol and Jessica were sentenced, Mr. Thompson contacted me with some surprising news. He had been going through my dad's old files when he stumbled upon a document that shed new light on the circumstances surrounding my mom's death. It turned out that my mom's aneurysm wasn't as sudden and unexpected as I had always believed. According to the document, my mom had been experiencing severe headaches and other neurological symptoms for months leading up to her death. She had seen several doctors, but none of them were able to diagnose the problem. However, one doctor had suspected an aneurysm and had recommended a specialized scan to confirm the diagnosis. My dad, for reasons unknown, had refused to authorize the scan. The document suggested that he had been deliberately withholding medical treatment from my mom, potentially contributing to her death. I was shocked and horrified by this revelation. Could it be possible that my dad, the man I had loved and admired, had been responsible for my mom's death? I confronted Mr. Thompson with my concerns, and he admitted that he had shared the same suspicions. He explained that he had kept the document hidden for years, fearing that it would destroy my image of my dad. But now that Carol and Jessica were out of the picture, he felt that I deserved to know the truth. I spent weeks grappling with this new information, trying to reconcile my memories of my dad with the possibility that he had been a monster. I replayed every conversation, every interaction, every moment I had shared with him, searching for clues that I had missed. As I delved deeper into my dad's past, I discovered even more disturbing secrets. I learned that he had been having an affair with Carol for years before my mom's death. Carol had been working as a secretary at his construction company, and they had developed a close relationship. My dad had even been paying for Carol and Jessica's lavish lifestyle, using money that should have been going to my mom and me. It became clear that Carol's interest in my dad wasn't just about money. She had been plotting to take my mom's place for years, and she had used my dad's affection for her to manipulate him into doing her bidding. I realized that Carol and Jessica weren't the only villains in my story. My dad had been a willing participant in their schemes, blinded by his own desires and weaknesses. He had betrayed my mom, he had betrayed me, and he had betrayed everything that I had believed in. The weight of this realization was almost unbearable. I felt like my entire world had been turned upside down, that everything I had known and loved was a lie. I struggled to come to terms with the fact that my parents, the people I had idolized, were flawed and imperfect, capable of making terrible mistakes. I began to question everything, wondering if I could ever truly trust anyone again. Despite the pain and confusion, I knew that I couldn't let these revelations destroy me. I had already overcome so much adversity in my life, and I refused to let the sins of my parents define me. I decided to use this experience as an opportunity to grow and learn, to become a stronger and more compassionate person. I sought therapy to help me process my emotions and develop healthy coping mechanisms. I spent more time with my friends and family, strengthening the bonds that had been strained by the events of the past few years. I also dedicated myself to my work at the animal clinic, finding solace and purpose in helping those who couldn't help themselves. Slowly, but surely, I began to heal. I learned to forgive my parents, not for their sake, but for my own. I realized that holding on to anger and resentment would only poison my own soul. I accepted that they were human, that they had made mistakes, and that I couldn't change the past, but I could control my future. I could choose to live a life of honesty, integrity, and compassion, honoring the memory of my mom and dad without condoning their wrongdoings. And so, I continued to live my life to the fullest, embracing the challenges and celebrating the triumphs. I found love again, I built a successful career, and I created a family of my own. I never forgot the lessons I had learned from my past, but I refused to let them define me. I emerged from the darkness stronger, wiser, and more resilient than ever before. The story of my revenge had come to an end, but the story of my life was just beginning. That's when I decided to embrace the quiet life Montana offered, a stark contrast to the turmoil I'd left behind in Maine. The animal clinic quickly became my sanctuary, a place where wagging tails and purring cats replaced the echoes of betrayal and deceit. My days were filled with mending broken wings, delivering newborn calves, and comforting anxious pet owners. The work was demanding, often requiring long hours and a strong stomach, but it was also incredibly rewarding. I found solace in the simplicity of caring for animals, in the unwavering loyalty they offered in return. I started to build a new community, surrounding myself with genuine people who valued honesty and compassion. Sarah, a fellow veterinarian and Montana native, became my closest friend. She was a no-nonsense woman with a dry wit and a deep love for the outdoors. We bonded over shared cases, late-night emergencies, and our mutual appreciation for the stunning Montana landscape. Slowly, I began to trust again, to open myself up to the possibility of connection without the fear of being betrayed. But the past, as it often does, had a way of creeping back into my present. One crisp autumn morning, as I was preparing for a busy day at the clinic, a strange vehicle pulled into the parking lot. It was a sleek black sedan with tinted windows, the kind you rarely see in our small town. A woman emerged from the car, her face hidden behind oversized sunglasses. As she approached the clinic, I felt a familiar knot of anxiety tighten in my stomach. There was something about her demeanor, her calculated movements, that reminded me of Carol. "Can I help you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. The woman removed her sunglasses, revealing a pair of cold, calculating eyes. It was Jessica. Jessica's sudden appearance in Montana sent a chill down my spine. The years in prison hadn't softened her. If anything, they seemed to have hardened her features, etching lines of bitterness around her mouth. "Emily," she said, her voice flat and devoid of emotion. "We need to talk." I hesitated for a moment, my mind racing. Part of me wanted to slam the door in her face and pretend she didn't exist, but curiosity and a morbid sense of obligation got the better of me. "What do you want, Jessica?" I asked, stepping aside to let her enter the clinic. She glanced around the waiting room, her eyes lingering on the posters of adorable puppies and kittens. "This is your life now," she sneered. "Playing doctor to farm animals." I ignored her sarcasm. "Get to the point, Jessica. I don't have time for games." She took a deep breath as if gathering her thoughts. "My mother is dying," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "She wants to see you." The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. Carol, the woman who had tried to kill me, was on her deathbed, and she wanted to see me. I couldn't believe it. "Why would I want to see her?" I asked, my voice rising in anger. "She tried to destroy my life." Jessica shrugged. "She says she has something to tell you, something important." I stared at her, trying to decipher her motives. Was this another trap, another attempt to manipulate me? Or was it genuine remorse? I couldn't tell. "I'll think about it," I said, turning away. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have patients to see." Jessica didn't move. "She doesn't have much time, Emily. If you want to hear what she has to say, you need to come soon." With that, she turned and walked out of the clinic, leaving me to grapple with a whirlwind of emotions. The thought of seeing Carol again filled me with dread, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed to hear what she had to say. Was it possible that she had finally found some measure of redemption? Or was she simply trying to inflict one last act of cruelty? The uncertainty gnawed at me, keeping me awake long into the night. Finally, I made a decision. I would go see Carol. I needed to know the truth, whatever it may be. The next morning, I booked a flight back to Maine. The flight to Maine felt like a journey back in time, dredging up memories I had tried so hard to bury. As the plane descended, I gazed out the window at the familiar landscape, the rolling hills and dense forests that had once been my home. A wave of nostalgia washed over me, mingled with a sense of unease. What awaited me in that place? Could I truly face Carol, the woman who had caused me so much pain? When I arrived at the prison, Jessica was waiting for me. She led me through a maze of sterile corridors, the air thick with the smell of disinfectant and despair. We passed inmates in orange jumpsuits, their faces etched with regret and resignation. The atmosphere was oppressive, suffocating. Finally, we reached Carol's cell. It was a small, cramped space, barely large enough to contain a cot, a toilet, and a small metal desk. Carol was lying on the cot, her face pale and gaunt. She looked frail and weak, a shadow of the vibrant, manipulative woman I remembered. As I entered the cell, her eyes flickered open. She stared at me for a long moment, her gaze filled with a mixture of surprise and something I couldn't quite decipher. "Emily," she whispered, her voice raspy and strained. "You came." I nodded, my throat tight with emotion. "Jessica said you wanted to see me." Carol managed a weak smile. "Yes," she said. "There's something I need to tell you, something I should have told you a long time ago." She paused, taking a shaky breath. "Your father." She began, then stopped, her face contorted with pain. "Your father didn't die of a heart attack." My blood ran cold. "What are you talking about?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Carol closed her eyes as if summoning the strength to continue. "He was poisoned," she said. "I poisoned him." The words hit me like a physical blow, knocking the wind out of me. I staggered backward, my hand flying to my mouth. "No," I gasped. "That's not possible." Carol opened her eyes again, her gaze piercing. "It's true," she said. "I poisoned his medication, a little bit each day until his heart finally gave out." I couldn't process what I was hearing. My father, the man I had blamed Carol for manipulating, had been murdered by her, and she was confessing to it now on her deathbed. Why? I asked, my voice trembling with rage and grief. Why would you do that? Carol's smile was bitter. For the money, of course, she said, but also for revenge. Your father was a weak man, Emily. Promised me the world, but he never delivered. He kept stringing me along, telling me that he would leave your mother, that he would marry me, but he never did. So I decided to take matters into my own hands. She paused, her eyes narrowing. And you, she said, her voice filled with venom. You were always in the way. You were a reminder of your mother, of the life that I couldn't have. I wanted you gone, Emily. I wanted to erase you from existence. I stared at her, my heart pounding in my chest. I couldn't believe the depth of her depravity, the extent of her cruelty. She had not only destroyed my family, but she had also poisoned my memories of my father, turning him into a monster. I hate you, I whispered, my voice filled with loathing. I hate you more than words can say. Carol chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. I don't care, she said. I'm dying anyway, but before I go, I wanted you to know the truth. I wanted you to know that I won. I turned and fled the cell, unable to bear another moment in her presence. As I stumbled through the prison corridors, I felt like I was suffocating, drowning in a sea of anger and despair. I needed to get out, to escape the darkness that had consumed my life for so long. But the truth was, the darkness was inside me now, a permanent stain on my soul. How could I ever move on, knowing that my father had been murdered, that my stepmother had been the one to do it, and that I had been her intended victim? I didn't know, but I knew one thing. I was not going to let Carol have the last word. Leaving the prison, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief that I had finally heard the truth, horror at the depravity of Carol's actions, and a burning desire for justice. Carol might think she had won, but I was determined to prove her wrong. I went straight to Mr. Thompson's office, my head swimming with the confession I had just heard. He listened intently, his face growing grimmer with each word. "This changes everything, Emily," he said when I had finished. "We need to take this to the authorities immediately." I nodded, my resolve hardening. "I want justice for my father," I said. "I want Carol to pay for what she did." Mr. Thompson contacted the local police, and within hours, Carol was being questioned about my father's death. The prison authorities, initially skeptical, were swayed by the evidence and Carol's deteriorating health. They knew she didn't have much time left, and they wanted to get to the truth before she died. During the interrogation, Carol, weakened and facing the consequences of her actions, confessed to poisoning my father. The details she provided matched the timeline of his illness, and the medical records confirmed that he had been given substances that could have caused his heart to fail. With her confession, the authorities were able to reopen the investigation into my father's death. They exhumed his body and conducted a thorough autopsy, which confirmed the presence of poison in his system. Carol was officially charged with murder, but given her condition, it was unlikely she would ever stand trial. Still, the knowledge that she was being held accountable for her crimes brought me a measure of peace. As Carol lay dying in her prison cell, I received a visit from Jessica. She looked even more haggard than before, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and regret. "I didn't know," she said, her voice barely audible. "I didn't know about the poison. I knew my mother wasn't a good person, but I never thought she was capable of murder." I stared at her, trying to gauge the sincerity of her words. "Did you know she was having an affair with my father?" I asked. Jessica nodded slowly. "Yes," she said. "I knew about that, but I thought it was just about the money. I thought she just wanted a better life for us." "And what about trying to kill me?" I asked, my voice rising in anger. "Did you know about that?" Jessica flinched. "No," she said. "I swear, Emily, I didn't know. My mother was always manipulative, but I never thought she would go that far. I'm so sorry," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry for everything." I looked at Jessica, her face contorted with remorse. Part of me wanted to hate her, to blame her for everything that had happened. But I also saw a broken, lost woman who had been caught in her mother's web of deceit. I realized that Jessica was a victim too, albeit in a different way than I was. "I don't know if I can forgive you, Jessica," I said, "but I hope that one day you can forgive yourself." With that, I turned and walked away, leaving her to grapple with her own demons. A few days later, I received word that Carol had died in prison. She had never expressed any genuine remorse for her actions, but at least she had confessed the truth before she passed away. With her death, a chapter of my life finally came to a close. I had faced my demons, uncovered the truth, and sought justice for my father. It was time to move on, to build a new life free from the shadows of the past. As I prepared to return to Montana, I felt a sense of closure I hadn't thought possible. But fate, it seemed, had one last surprise in store for me. Before leaving Maine, Mr. Thompson asked me to come to his office one last time. He had something to show me, he said, something that had been hidden away for years. When I arrived, he led me to a dusty corner of his office where he pulled out an old wooden chest. "Your father asked me to keep this safe," he said, unlocking the chest with a small key. "He said it was something that belonged to your mother. He wanted you to have it, but only when the time was right." I stared at the chest, my heart pounding with anticipation. What could it contain? Secrets from my mother's past, a hidden treasure. As I lifted the lid, I gasped. Inside the chest was a collection of old letters, photographs, and journals. They were all addressed to my mother, but they weren't from my father. They were from another man, a man named David. As I began to read the letters, a story unfolded, a story of forbidden love and heartbreaking choices. It turned out that my mother had been in love with David before she met my father. They had been childhood sweethearts, but their families had disapproved of their relationship. My mother's family wanted her to marry someone wealthier, someone who could provide her with a more comfortable life. David, on the other hand, was a struggling artist with no prospects. Torn between her love for David and her duty to her family, my mother had made a difficult choice. She had broken up with David and married my father, hoping to find happiness in a more practical, stable relationship. But the letters revealed that she had never stopped loving David. They had continued to correspond in secret, sharing their hopes, dreams, and regrets. The journals were filled with her innermost thoughts and feelings, her longing for David, and her guilt over betraying her husband. As I read through the letters and journals, I began to see my mother in a new light. I had always thought of her as a quiet, reserved woman who was content with her life. But now, I realized that she had been hiding a deep sadness, a secret longing for a love that could never be. I also began to understand my father's actions in a different way. Perhaps he had known about my mother's feelings for David. Perhaps he had been insecure and jealous, which could explain why he had refused to authorize the scan that might have saved her life. He was not the hero I thought he was, but neither was he the simple villain that Carol had painted him to be. He was a flawed human being, capable of both love and cruelty. The revelation of my mother's secret love affair changed everything I thought I knew about my family. It added layers of complexity to their story, blurring the lines between right and wrong, good and evil. I realized that there were no simple answers, no easy explanations for the choices people make. We are all shaped by our past experiences, our hidden desires, and our unspoken fears. As I prepared to leave Maine, I carried with me a newfound understanding of my parents and their complicated relationship. I knew that I would never fully unravel the mysteries of their lives, but I could at least accept them for who they were, with all their flaws and imperfections. And as I returned to my own life in Montana, I vowed to live with greater honesty, compassion, and understanding, knowing that the secrets we keep can often be more damaging than the truths we reveal. I also knew that despite the darkness I had faced, I was resilient and ready to fully embrace the good things in my life that were yet to come. Back in Montana, the familiar rhythm of my life at the clinic provided a comforting sense of normalcy. Yet I couldn't shake the impact of the revelations I'd uncovered in Maine. The knowledge of my mother's hidden love and my father's potential role in her death cast a long shadow, forcing me to reevaluate everything I thought I knew about my family. I found myself confiding in Sarah, sharing the letters and journals I had discovered. She listened patiently, offering her usual blend of blunt honesty and unwavering support. "So, your parents weren't perfect," she said, when I had finished recounting the story. "Join the club. Nobody's parents are perfect. The important thing is that you're not letting their mistakes define you." Her words were a welcome reminder that I had the power to choose my own path, to create a life free from the burdens of the past. But the weight of my family's secrets lingered, making it difficult to fully embrace the present. I found myself withdrawing from others, haunted by the thought that I, too, was destined to repeat the mistakes of my parents. One evening, as I was working late at the clinic, a new client walked in. He was a tall, handsome man with kind eyes and a warm smile. His name was David, and he had brought in his injured golden retriever for treatment. As I examined the dog, I couldn't help but notice David's gentle demeanor and genuine concern for his pet. There was something about him that put me at ease, a sense of familiarity that I couldn't quite explain. Over the next few weeks, David became a regular at the clinic, bringing his dog in for follow-up appointments and checkups. We struck up a friendship, bonding over our shared love of animals and our appreciation for the Montana landscape. He was a talented artist, just like the David from my mother's letters, and he shared his paintings with me, depicting the stunning beauty of the mountains and valleys that surrounded us. As I spent more time with David, I began to feel a spark of attraction, a sense of connection that I hadn't experienced with anyone else. But I was hesitant to pursue a relationship, fearing that I was simply repeating my mother's pattern of seeking solace in forbidden love. One day, as we were hiking in the mountains, David stopped and turned to me, his eyes filled with emotion. "Emily," he said, "I know this might be too soon, but I have to tell you how I feel. I've fallen in love with you." My heart skipped a beat. I had been waiting to hear those words, but I was also terrified of what they might mean. "David," I said, I don't know what to say." He took my hand in his touch sending a shiver down my spine. "Just say you feel the same way," he said, his voice pleading. "Just say there's a chance for us." I looked into his eyes, and I saw nothing but honesty and sincerity. In that moment, I knew that I couldn't let fear hold me back any longer. I had to take a chance on love, to embrace the possibility of happiness, even if it meant risking heartbreak. "Yes, David," I said, my voice trembling. "I love you too." He smiled, a radiant smile that lit up his face. He pulled me into his arms, and we kissed, the mountains echoing with our laughter and joy. Our relationship blossomed quickly, filling my life with a sense of warmth and contentment I hadn't known was possible. David was everything I had ever wanted in a partner: kind, compassionate, and supportive. He understood my past, my fears, and my dreams, and he loved me for who I was, flaws and all. As our love deepened, I began to feel a sense of healing, a release from the pain and trauma of my past. David helped me to see that I wasn't defined by my parents' mistakes, that I was capable of creating my own destiny. One sunny afternoon, as we were picnicking by a crystal-clear lake, David got down on one knee and proposed. "Emily," he said, his voice filled with emotion, "will you marry me? Will you spend the rest of your life with me?" Tears welled up in my eyes as I nodded, my heart overflowing with joy. "Yes, David," I said, my voice choked with emotion. "Yes, I will marry you." We embraced, our love soaring as high as the majestic mountains that surrounded us. As we began planning our wedding, I felt a sense of completion, a sense that I had finally found my place in the world. I had overcome the darkness of my past, I had found love again, and I was ready to embrace the future with open arms. But as fate would have it, one last twist awaited me, a revelation that would challenge everything I thought I knew about my identity. A few weeks before the wedding, I received a letter from an attorney in California. He informed me that a woman named Elizabeth had recently passed away, and she had named me as her sole heir. I was stunned. I didn't know anyone named Elizabeth, and I couldn't imagine why she would leave me her entire estate. Curious, I contacted the attorney and learned that Elizabeth had been a close friend of my mother's. They had met in art school years ago, before my mother married my father. The attorney explained that Elizabeth had always regretted losing touch with my mother, and she had tried to find her over the years. When she finally learned of my mother's death, she was devastated. She had followed my story in the news, learning about the tragedies I had faced and the resilience I had shown. Inspired by my strength and compassion, she had decided to leave me her entire fortune, hoping to provide me with a fresh start and a chance to pursue my dreams. Overwhelmed with emotion, I flew to California to meet with the attorney and learn more about Elizabeth. He showed me photos of her, and I was struck by her resemblance to my mother. They had the same kind eyes, the same gentle smile. As I delved deeper into Elizabeth's life, I discovered that she had been a successful artist and philanthropist. She had dedicated her life to helping others, donating her time and money to various causes. She had been a kind, generous, and compassionate woman, just like my mother. And then, the attorney dropped a bombshell. He revealed that Elizabeth had been more than just a friend to my mother. She had been her lover. The revelation that my mother had been in a same-sex relationship with Elizabeth sent shockwaves through my being. It challenged everything I thought I knew about my family, my identity, and my place in the world. I had always believed that my mother's secret love had been with the David from her letters, but now I realized that her true love had been with Elizabeth all along. The letters and journals I had discovered in Maine were just a small piece of the puzzle, a glimpse into a much larger, more complex story. My mother had been living a double life, torn between her duty to her family and her desire for true love. She had married my father to please her family and provide me with a stable life, but she had never stopped loving Elizabeth. They had maintained a secret relationship for years, meeting in secret and exchanging letters filled with their hopes, dreams, and regrets. I began to understand why my mother had always seemed so sad, so distant. She had been living a lie, forced to suppress her true feelings and hide her true identity. And I realized that my father must have known about her relationship with Elizabeth. That could explain his jealousy, his insecurity, and his potential role in her death. The weight of these revelations was almost unbearable. I felt like my entire world had been turned upside down, that everything I had believed in was a lie. But as I processed my emotions, I began to feel a sense of liberation, a sense that I was finally free to be myself, to embrace my true identity, whatever that may be. I realized that my mother's story was not a tragedy, but a testament to the power of love and the courage to live authentically. She had faced immense challenges and sacrifices, but she had never given up on her true self. And now, it was my turn to honor her legacy by living my life with honesty, integrity, and compassion. I returned to Montana, where I shared the news with David. He listened patiently, offering his unwavering support. "This doesn't change anything, Emily," he said. "I love you for who you are, regardless of your family's secrets. Your mother was a brave woman, and I'm sure she would be proud of you." His words were a source of comfort and strength, reminding me that I was loved and accepted for who I was. As we continued planning our wedding, I made a decision to honor my mother and Elizabeth by incorporating elements of their story into the ceremony. I asked a close friend to read a poem by a lesbian poet, and I included a special tribute to Elizabeth in the wedding program. I also decided to use the money I had inherited from Elizabeth to start a foundation in her name, dedicated to supporting LGBTQ plus youth and promoting equality and acceptance. On our wedding day, as I walked down the aisle towards David, I felt a sense of peace and joy I had never experienced before. I was surrounded by love and support, and I knew that my mother and Elizabeth were watching over me, smiling down from above. I had finally found my place in the world, and I was ready to embrace the future with open arms, knowing that anything was possible with love, courage, and resilience.